and welcome to Political Capital. I'm Chris Bishop. Now this week we have the Minister of Public Service and Administration, Ayanda Dlodlo, in the studio this week, and we're going to talk to her about the elections, what's going to happen to the civil service, and also the plight of women in Africa. Thank you very much for joining us, Minister.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And there's a lot of issues on your plate at the moment, but the first one, the coming one, the news one, is the elections. This year you're preparing. How do you think the ruling party is going to fare in these elections on May the 8th?
Well, I think from working on the ground and talking to people, of course there are people that still love the ANC, that are not necessarily very happy people right now. But there's a lot more who are happy with the ANC, although they do acknowledge that we could improve on service delivery. So I would see the ANC at the very least at 62%.
Okay, well,
that's the very least.
Very optimistic, I think.
I have to.
Some of the analysts say, well, it could be 57, could be 58%. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm looking at 62.
62%.
At the very least, yeah.
You're an optimist. Yeah. But, okay, but the ruling party has been through very rough times. I mean, I was, when I covered the last election in 2014, I mean, compared to now, the turmoil there's been, the changes there have been, the anger there's been on the ground from a lot of people, voters. How are you going to deal with that?
What you also need to realize is that depending on what's topical, the polls look different from day to day. On one day, things would look smooth and good and would be projected at 65% or 66%. On a bad day, would be projected at the 57% that you're talking about. I think we're on the 53rd or 54th day now before the election itself. There's a lot of hard work that we need to be doing, ensuring that people actually do get to the voting stations, because one of the things is that we shouldn't be complacent to say we know that people are going to go, we know that people are going to vote for the ANC, but getting people actually to the voting stations is the most important thing on any day of an election. So that's what we need to be working towards.
And you're presumably out there on the campaign trail now, talking to people on the ground. What sort of reaction, what's the worst reaction you're getting from people?
The worst reaction is that we're not going to vote.
No.
It's not even about we're not going to vote for the ANC more than it is we're not going to vote. The best reaction is, well, we'll give the ANC a chance. It's cleaning up house. The ANC is dealing with the issues that we've spoken about as citizens. So it blows hot and cold depending on what's topical on any given day. How
much does that hurt you? I mean, you were an activist. You've given your life to the liberation of this country. You were in controversies where... how much it hurt you when you hear your fellow South Africans say, oh, I'm not going to bother to vote?
The sad thing for me is when you hear people say nothing has changed since 1994. And it's hurtful because there is so much that has changed. Has it changed to the extent that everybody is experiencing a better life necessarily? The answer might not be a resounding yes. But there is more, people have more access to opportunities, to government services than they could have ever dreamt about before 1994. So the hurtful thing is when people say nothing has changed since 1994. Maybe there are shortcomings, there are lapses in certain instances, but things certainly have changed since 1994. There's no Group Areas Act, people don't get arrested willy-nilly, people don't get killed willy-nilly by the state. People have access to pensions, people have access to a multiple of grants just to alleviate the issues around poverty and unemployment. And people have broader access to educational opportunities. And there's a whole host of things that this government, in the 25 years that it has done. Could certain things have been done better? The answer is yes. There's quite a number of things that we really need to check up our systems on. One of which, for instance, is the implementation of ANC resolutions, timelessly. Conference comes, take a decision, take a resolution. In that 5 years, those resolutions have to be implemented. And the ANC needs to put in place a vigorous accountability framework that will ensure that its deployees are held accountable on the implementation of the ANC manifesto and the resolutions of conference.
Where do you think the ANC needs to pull up its socks then for the voters?
Accountability. The ANC must really hold us accountable. If we do not step up to the mark as expected by our people, the ANC must remove us and ensure that it brings on board people that actually do implement on the resolutions of conference, but also on the manifesto, so that the lives of our people really do improve, things do change, because we've got fantastic policies. It's only at the implementation level that it becomes a problem. But also with civil servants, they should also step up their mark. They have a responsibility to implement, and that is constitutional, the programs of the party of the day. Now, what that means is we come into power, we're on the back of a manifesto. That manifesto needs to be implemented. And that manifesto has got nothing to do with individuals of the African National Congress, but the people of South Africa. So even heads of departments, the deputy directors general, right up to the last person in the line in an organization, everybody must put their best foot forward and be properly evaluated for the work that they do.
But you've been in cabinet for quite some time. What's been going wrong with this service delivery? I mean, every day we see reports of people protesting. They're not having basic things like water and electricity, basic services. Why hasn't this been getting through to the people?
Well, our performance management system that we're working on now to ensure that it is more vigorous than it has been in the past, that people are actually held accountable, not only for the things that they deliver, for that which they do not deliver as well. So that's the one thing. A more nuanced approach to training and development, so that we ensure that people who are responsible for certain programs are properly equipped to implement on those programs. I'll give you an example of Mudupi and Kusile. Major programs that were going to change the face of South Africa with regards to the supply of energy, but have become a monumental failure. Monumental failure for a few reasons, one of which is the inability to do contract management effectively. And if you look at the people that are responsible, they could be engineers, they know their work, but are they trained in contract management? Are they trained efficiently and effectively to implement projects as big as those? So even our training and development programs also need to take those things into account. That as we go for the big programs, we have capacity to ensure their implementation, but monitor their implementation so that we don't sit with the problems that we sit with today.
I mean, one of the great problems that people have with the way the government's gone about running the country, especially over the last decade, is, and I speak for myself here as a voter and a taxpayer, is corruption. You know, a lot of people are saying that if there had not been so much corruption in the government, there would be more houses, there would be more services, there would be more people connected to electricity. What do you say to that?
Corruption is there. Corruption is something that is a blight for any society. But part of the reason why we do not implement in certain instances is that people are afraid to take decisions lest they are seen as being corrupt. Now, that's not an excuse, but it does happen. We see it in departments. Programs are set in place, there's a budget in place, but it takes 10, 15 years before anything is ever implemented. What could the problem be, apart from training and development, the skills issues? It could very well be that people are scared to take decisions that have got huge financial implications. And it's not just on corruption, but because, one, they might not be comfortable enough with certain decisions, but also because they are just afraid there is just too much money at stake and they do not want to be seen to be corrupt. So there are many reasons why we do not implement. For instance, we change tech halfway through implementation. The digital migration program, for instance, your broadband infrastructure program, for instance, that has taken so many years to implement. And it is not because money has been misappropriated or there's been wanton looting and corruption, but it's just that at a decision-making level, there is no sense of urgency.
I mean, just before President Cyril Ramaphosa took over, I was with him in Davos, and he made a speech. He said that this thing about corruption in our country is a simple answer. Anyone who has broken the law or taken money will be behind the bars of a jail. How likely do you think we're going to see that?
Well, that is going to happen. What we've done as a department in trying to implement the Public Administration Management Act, we're developing regulations, which I am sure by the end of March, we would, by the end of April, we would have completed. One of the regulations is the establishment of a technical assistance unit that looks at anti-corruption, that looks at ethics and integrity, and putting in place ethics officers in every department, but also beefing up our capacity to roll out disciplinary cases within the public service, because you find a situation where a person has been on suspension for a very long time, and that person could either be guilty or innocent, and we do not deal with those issues, which then gives an impression that we are soft on discipline. Meanwhile, it is the supervisors that are dragging their feet in dealing with issues of discipline, including corruption and misappropriation of funds. Because that's the point. I mean, a lot of people are asking, does government have enough teeth to deal with this corruption? Those are the teeth that we're trying to establish through the Public Service, the Public Administration Management Act and the regulations that go with that. We are full steam ahead in trying to deal with that. And presumably there are no sacred cows in this search. I mean, right up to ministerial level if somebody's found guilty? Well, there shouldn't really, because what you see today with a disgruntled citizenry points to the fact that we need to do more to deal with these issues of transgressions. And some of these transgressions are not necessarily because of corruption. Sometimes it is just a laissez-faire approach towards implementation of government programs. So that's why I raised the issue of performance management. That honestly, why should I pay you a performance bonus for doing your work? You have to really be walking on water for me to even consider giving you a bonus for what it is that you have delivered on. So those who go beyond and above the call of duty, in my view, are the ones that are supposed to get performance bonuses, but not for the work that you've done. You get paid for that. So you think performance bonuses for people in government, they should be suspended altogether? We're already looking at that. We're already looking at that, because we're trying to contain expenditure, but also trying to ensure that people go above and beyond the call of duty in the implementation of programs. When will this happen? There's a circular out already. So it could be even this year? We're moving. And I'll show maybe some disappointed people at the end of the year. But it's a sliding effect. I mean, this year we're going to pay a certain percentage until at some point it gets to zero, and then we can then look at the whole performance management system. We'll hold that thought there, Minister. We're going to a short break now. When we come back, we're going to talk about the thorny issue of the civil service. Also, we're going to talk about the situation of women here in South Africa. Do stay tuned with us. Welcome back. You're with Political Capital. I'm Chris Bishop. Now, still in the studio, we've got the Minister of Public Service and Administration, that's Ayanda Dlodlo. We've been talking in the first half about the elections, and hopefully we hope to tackle the civil service and the issues of women in this continent. Ayanda Dlodlo. Now, in the first half, we talked quite a bit about the problem of corruption. This state capture commission that's going on at the moment, a lot of people are asking and saying, well, fine, it's grim viewing sometimes on TV, it's interesting viewing, it's bringing everything out in the open, but what happens next? Are people going to end up in prison? Well, it will depend on what is brought before the commission and whether or not it warrants, whatever is brought warrants investigation, further investigation. And if it does warrant further investigation, I think at some point we will see action in the form of trials and stuff like that. But the good thing with the commission now that we're seeing is that it's now starting to separate fact from fiction. At the beginning, one was not sure where will this all end. And we're seeing more and more people coming through now. The cross-examination phase is the most important for me. I mean, all of us can go and say the things that we wanted to say. We might want to go and vent and all of that, but wait for the opportunity for those that you have said transgressed the rule of law to come back and cross-examine your testimony before the Zondo Commission. So for me, it's important that we should all, I mean, if I have accused someone of doing something, I should then avail myself to be cross-examined, so that we can really separate the chaff from the wheat, or the wheat from the chaff, whichever way. Yeah.
And you'd be prepared to give evidence if ever you were?
I don't know if there's anything to give evidence on my side. I mean, I was in a non-decision-making role, as deputy ministers are, for the longest of time. So I'm not sure why I would ever even be called in to testify on anything.
As a minister, how do you feel when you're watching it on the screen? It must be quite a very strange experience for you.
I don't know how many countries actually do something like this. And South Africa tends to set trends for the world in quite a number of issues, including human rights. So this for us was something new. It's painful to watch. It unfolds in the middle of an election campaign for the ruling party. But at the same time, some of the things that are coming out were bound to come out at any point in our lives, and dealing with it in a more nuanced fashion to ensure that everybody who needs to be heard is heard, and everybody who needs to respond to matters because they have put forth certain things before the Zondo Commission, they all need to come forth and avail themselves for cross-examination. There should be no holy cows, truly speaking here, because if you make an allegation against me, be prepared to come before me, for me to cross-examine you on the things that you have said about.
This must be painful for you. I mean, some of these people, they're your colleagues for like 30, 40 years.
It is.
But okay, we'll move on to the thorny subject of the civil service. There were moves in the budget to try to reduce it. As you know, a lot of the donors and foreign investors are saying that the South Africans' civil service is too big. I saw you quoted the other day saying that you felt that the civil service wasn't bloated. And why did you say that?
That's what I said in my first interview when I was appointed as Minister for Public Service and Administration. Because if you look at the numbers, you look at the population figures, you look at where we come from as a country, the programs that we need to implement on, the public service delivery protests, the state of affairs with regards to service delivery points like hospitals, home affairs and all of that, you would know that we need more people in the system.
So you think we actually need more people rather than fewer civil
We
servants?
actually need more people. We need more police officers. We need more people in home affairs. We need more people in the Department of Health. We need more people in defense because of the international obligations that we have on peacekeeping in the continent, and also our obligations with regards to now as we are members of the Security Council. So we have international obligations to cater for, but also the needs of our people as well. And truly speaking, you sometimes find us wanting in terms of delivery on those international obligations, but also on our internal obligations as a country. So we can't really come to a point where we say we have got more people than we need. The police services, if I'm not mistaken, needs about 30,000 boots on the ground. And the figures for the Department of Home Affairs are also high. It would mean that we would have to look at your admin-related positions to retrain and reskill people for deployment in areas where there are shortages. But we are actually even less than the 1.3 million figure that we're bandy about.
But this is concerning because, I mean, according to the budget, we're going to have a lot fewer. I mean, tens of thousands. Are you not looking at 30,000 early
We are
retirements?
not necessarily going to have fewer people. We are going to have, we could very well have even more people, but the wage bill itself would be lessened because we would be bringing in new people into the system.
And speaking of which, the one question we do have is that, was there a skills audit put in place before this process was decided in the budget?
There was a skills audit that was done, I think, about 6-7 years ago. And I've asked the public service, the P-seater, I don't know what it's called, but I've asked the P-seater together with the National School of Government, with the Department of Public Service and Administration, to do a skills audit so that we can determine what skills we require, what skills we have, the gaps, and how it is that we're going to be tackling those gaps. So you will find that, for instance, as we move towards a digitized government, we're going to need skills of analysts, we're going to need people that are going to be developing apps, we're going to need a whole host of skills that, that go with it. But from a health perspective, there are certain skills that are also required. In agriculture, for instance, where there are endless opportunities for economic growth, we also need particular skills that we do not have.
I mean, one criticism I've heard is that maybe some of the people who take an early retirement may be hired back as consultants. It's happened before in government at greater cost to the taxpayer.
We will try to avoid that at all costs. That's why we're putting in place training programs for new recruits to ensure that their induction is accelerated, but also exposure to the way that government works and in the implementation of their own work, what needs to be put in place to assist them. Now we're looking to providing, for instance, countries like China have said we're willing to open up space for you to bring in people that we could train further. I was recently in the UK. The UK government, well, universities in the UK are willing to train some of our people. Universities in South Africa have reached out as well. So we're looking across the globe for training and development in certain areas where we would require assistance.
But how likely is it in all of this you might have some problems with the unions?
The unions are our partners in the implementation of whatever program. But you must also remember that we also have a responsibility as enshrined in the Constitution, the Public Service Act, the Public Administration Management Act, to ensure that our government is effective, it is also efficient, and it is capable. So all of those issues the unions do understand. We just need to ensure that we walk the path together, we support one another in ensuring that the type of people that we bring on board and those that remain in the organization are people that are conscious of what it is that they need to deliver on.
And the 30,000 early retirements, what is the progress on that so far?
We don't have a figure of 30,000. What National Treasury did is they looked at a figure that they could afford in terms of the payout for people that would leave the service early. We've got about 127,000 people between the ages of 55 and 59 that could go on early retirement. What we need to be looking at is to ensure that we do not let people go who we really need in the system. We will look at skills retention, we will look at institutional memory, we will look at shortages and the possibility of upskilling of certain individuals, and we will just not let people go like that. We cannot even afford to let that many people go. So we'll have to be very circumspect in the way that we apply this. We're visiting departments, we've started this, we're visiting departments to see what the shortages of particular skills are, what skills they cannot lose, and giving direction and guidance in terms of how it is that heads of department should approach this.
And just moving to another very difficult subject in our society right now, and that's the vulnerability of women. It's becoming a national, well, international issue around the world, and quite right too, I think. How worried are you in this day and age? You're a soldier, you fought for freedom. How worried are you in this day and age about the women of Africa who live in this country?
Oh, it's hugely worrisome. And I just hope that families will be able to deal with this, because it's really a societal scourge more than it is a law enforcement scourge. Because in a lot of instances, those people women who get murdered, who get raped, usually get raped and murdered and assaulted by people that they know. It's very seldom that you get abused by people that you do not know. So it also comes into the societal value system that needs to be enhanced. And that starts at the nucleus of the family, in how we bring up our children, in how we deal with conflict, whether it is in the home or in society. If we resort to violence in dealing with conflict, that's what you will get in the end. But also for men to be able to deal with their own inadequacies, because some of these inadequacies that certain men experience play themselves out in what you see in the way that they treat women, in the way that they relate to women, in the way that not only women that they do not have intimate relationships with, but also even with their mothers, even with their children. So it's a broad societal issue. What also needs to happen is that the criminal justice system should also be tough on crimes like this, because one of the deterrents of crimes of this nature is a criminal justice system that deals with matters decisively. So as long as people can get away with murder, as long as people can get away with treating women in the way that they do, more people are going to do it. So the criminal justice system really needs to check up its own system.
Another issue, I mean, as you know, there have been many cases of sexual impropriety in government and in your government. How do you deal with it in your ministry, and how do you think this government should deal with it?
Well, in government it's very clear. There's the processes and systems that we've put in place. One, to deal with it from a disciplinary point of view, a victimization point of view, but also we provide employee wellness and well-being programs to counsel people and to help people to deal with problems that they cannot before it actually escalates into issues of violence against women and children. So as a government, we've tried our best to put systems in place to try and help individuals, but we can only try. I mean, the law must also take its course when these things happen, whether it is in the workplace or in society.
Thank you very much, Ayanda Dlodlo, the Minister of Public Service and Administration. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this edition of Political Capital. From me, Chris Bishop, it's goodbye.